Welcome to For the Defense. My name is Attorney Wesley Buchanan. We are going to be talking about a case today, State v. Mathis, and let's get to that case site in a minute. Here is my information. As you can take a look there, this is not legal advertising. The disclaimers will all be at the end of today's case. Now, today's case is State v. Mathis, 2020, Ohio 3068, out of the 6th District here in the state of Ohio. This is Lucas County, so this is Toledo area. Now, as far as the facts of this case are concerned, on June 8, 2011, the Toledo firefighters were called to the home of Robert Mathis and Jennifer Molnar. Now, upon arrival, the firefighters found Molnar's body lying on an air mattress. And Molnar had been suffered battered and bruised all over her body and significant burns to her face. Robert spoke to the firefighters and informed them Robert had not seen Mathis since 10 in the morning, and Robert had been in and out during the day. Now, as far as the legal issues are concerned for this case, we're going to be talking about prior bad acts, and these are the evidentiary rules that are going to go with those prior bad acts. Evidence Rule 401, 404B, and Evidence Rule 403. These are all usually referred to as character evidence, and they're all lumped in together. Now, more facts of the case. Robert's story to the firefighters that he was turning on the hot water and then he went downstairs to see the hot water heater and the tank didn't work. That's when he found Molnar's body. Robert carried her upstairs and put her on the air mattress and then tried to perform CPR and help on her. And then he called the authorities who came in to investigate. After the investigation, the police did not charge Robert. Now, however, on January 20th, 2017, the Lucas County grand jury indicted Robert with aggravated murder and murder for Molnar's death. On May 30th, 2017, the government filed its notice of intent to use evidence of prior bad acts by Robert. Robert was not a plain white dove, and there were prior bad acts. Specifically, the government wanted to tell the jury of 3 separate incidences of Robert. These were incidences where Robert was violent. One incident involved Molnar, the victim in this case, but 2 did not. The trial court held a hearing in this regard and permitted the other act's evidence to be admitted during Robert's trial. Now, during that trial, the government introduced evidence that Robert had written Molnar's family a letter while Robert was in prison. Robert's letter threatened Molnar and her family. The government also called a bartender who testified that Molnar had been in a bar in 2009 and was, quote, a hot mess and, quote, beat up. Molnar had accused Robert of issuing that beating, and this is what the bartender, the third party, testified to at Robert's trial. Now, Molnar's brother then testified at Robert's trial that Robert and Molnar, when they began dating, Molnar's life just went off the rails. Molnar was always showing signs of bruising and beating on her body, and she began using drugs. Molnar was in the ICU after an incident with Robert. Now, in addition to all of this, the government called Robert's ex-girlfriend to testify how Robert would beat her, and she dropped assault charges against Robert against one of those incidences. Those incidents occurred in 2013 and 2014. Now, Molnar was killed in 2011. Now, Robert objected, and his trial counsel objected to all this testimony at trial, and he did not testify in his own defense. One might assume here, after the jury deliberated, they convicted Robert, and the trial court immediately sentenced him to life in prison without parole, which was the authorized sentence in this case. Robert appealed to the 6th District Court of Appeals. Now, like we talked about the legal issues that we're going over, the standard of review for legal issues on appeal are generally abuse of discretion. And this is a quote, for as many Ohio practitioners will know, an abuse of discretion connotates that the trial court's attitude is unreasonable, arbitrary, or unconscionable. An abuse of discretion is very difficult to sustained because usually one judge may let the evidence in, another judge may not let the evidence in. So it's one of those things. Now, Robert had claimed that on appeal, Robert claimed that the other act's evidence had nothing to do with Molnar's murder, and it should not have been admitted at trial. The Court of Appeals explained, again, this is all in the case site, that, quote, the trial court has broad discretion in the admission of evidence, and unless it has clearly abused its discretion and the defendant has been materially prejudiced thereby, this court should be slow to interfere. And this is what we know as the abuse of discretion standard. The Court of Appeals noted that the Ohio Supreme Court has a three-step analysis to determine if other acts are admissible. And this is something that if you've done a lot of criminal work, you understand what those other acts are. It's whether the other acts prove motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, or absence of mistake or accident. And finally, is the probative value of the other act's evidence substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice? And that's where we saw the evidentiary rules. Now, in this case, the Court of Appeals focused on the second step. At Robert's trial, the government introduced Robert's prior bad acts to prove Robert's identity of Molnar's killer. Furthermore, the government was attempting to use Robert's prior bad acts to show that Robert had a modus operandi, which we know by slang as an MO. And the court goes on to answer a very important question, which isn't answered an awful lot, but it is, what is a modus operandi and behavioral fingerprint? And that's what they spend most of their time on. So it's a 38-page analysis as far as the Court of Appeals opinion. The Court of Appeals, using the prior case law, stated that the reason to admit the modus operandi evidence is because it provides a behavioral fingerprint, which, when compared to behavioral fingerprints associated with the crime in question, can be used to identify the defendant as the perpetrator. So what the government was trying to do is to say, listen, Robert beat women. He beat a woman to death. That's really what they were trying to do. To be admissible, though, to prove identity through a certain modus operandi, other acts of evidence must be related and share common features with the crime in question. The standard for admissibility of other acts of evidence is strict, and this is because we don't try people in criminal courts because they're bad people. We just don't say, that's a bad person, that's a bad person. The Court of Appeals applied this logic to Robert's case. In Robert's case, there is not the same distinctive characteristics between the prior bad acts and the alleged murder. Robert's previous bad acts didn't even match it. The allegation was that Molnar was killed with a ball-peen hammer. There was no evidence that Robert had ever used a ball-peen hammer before or beat anybody with a ball-peen hammer. In addition, the appellate court rationed that Molnar had tested positive for various illegal drugs in these previous incidents, and Robert never engaged in sexual violence towards Molnar, which were some of the other examples and the other cases that the court used. Now, as far as this case is concerned, the Court of Appeals used that logic to this case, and it was not a fingerprint for Robert. And again, it's a very good case for prior bad acts evidence. Now, the Court of Appeals held that this evidence was improperly admitted, and that's just the first step in the analysis. The court had to go on to say this error was not harmless, because if the court found that the error was harmless, then Robert would not be entitled to a new trial, and then his convictions would stand. Now, the court goes through the other evidence presented at trial and says that the case against Robert was entirely circumstantial, that there was no direct physical or witness testimony placing Robert at the scene of Molnar's murder, and that's circumstantial. The government spent most of the case trying Robert and his bad acts. There were 6 witnesses at Robert's trial about what prior bad acts he had. There were only 4 witnesses about Molnar's murder. So it was evident to the court that the court said, this is not harmless error, and the remedy here is a new trial. So the 6th District Court of Appeals reversed Robert's conviction and has granted him a new trial. And again, the case is cited State v. Mathis, 2020, Ohio 3068. And we thank you so much for listening. there is the disclaimers, and we'll see you next time.